Daniel Dobson. I'm pretty sure that my brain is just a series of very poorly organized file cabinets. I think when I was little, if I had like a novel experience or heard a word that I'd never heard before, I'm pretty sure my brain was just sticking them in some kind of to be determined folder. Like when I was around 7 or 8, this mean neighborhood boy said, "Your mom's a hooker." And I was like, "No, she's not." I didn't know what hooker was, but I could tell that he was being mean. Of course, if I knew, I would have said, "Look, man, my mom homeschools the 4 of us and sews most of our clothes, so where would she find a time to be a hooker?" But later on in life, when I learned what that was, my brain doesn't have this elaborate, like, Dewey Decimal System of organization where it defines the word and then moves it to the H's or synonyms for prostitute. It just defines it and jams it back in the TBD folder because there's apparently no time. And the problem with that is that later on in life, as a fully grown adult, I reach for a word in this now very large TBD folder and accidentally pull out one I didn't mean. So this came back to bite me my senior year of college. I was attending a conservative Christian university in Oklahoma, and I was on student government. Part of my responsibility in this role was that I was supposed to take this council of about 40 students out on a team building retreat for the weekend. We were gonna go water skiing for the weekend, and so we had about a 2-hour drive. I was driving one of these 15-person vans, and my van ended up filled with almost entirely freshmen, so there's this kind of percolating beginning of college energy. And if you've ever been on a road trip with people you don't know very well, you know that there's this natural progression to the way that conversation evolves, where you start with relatively innocuous questions like, "Oh, where'd you grow up? What are you studying in college?" And you end up having, asking more serious questions. So at one point, someone in the van asked everyone, "What's everyone's greatest fear?" That question's kind of winding its way through the van, and I'm up there driving, thinking about what I'm gonna say, because whatever, I'm not the biggest fan of heights. But the reality was that for the 2 years prior to that, I had been coming to terms with what my greatest fear definitely was. My wife, who was my fiance at the time, her grandmother, this effervescent, bright, sweet woman named Elsie Jones, who I'd grown very fond of. She was in the process of dying from Alzheimer's. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced, that is a horrible disease. And when you're adjacent to it, when you're in the periphery, or I guess walking alongside someone who is in the process of dying from Alzheimer's, I don't think it's totally possible not to internalize that to a degree and start to ask yourself questions about what you would do, right? If you found out that you had that disease. So when it came my turn in the van, even though other people were like, "Snakes," I was like, let's get serious. And I told them, I said, "Look, I don't know who I am outside of my memory. I don't know who I am outside of my ability to kind of tell my own story of where I've come from, where I'm headed, and understand myself in relationship to the people around me who love me and whom I love. And if I lost that, I don't know what's left. And I'm more afraid of than like some painful death or horrible way to go. I think I'm afraid of disappearing before I'm gone." And I decided to kind of drive the point home. Right around this time, there was this hot button political debate around medically assisted suicide. And I thought I would connect to current events. And I said, if I were ever diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I think really that's the only time I would consider euthanasia. Except the problem is that euthanasia is one of those words in the TBD folder. I don't actually remember how old I was the first time I heard it, but I do remember thinking, what do young people in Asia have to do with medically assisted suicide? What I actually said to the van as we were driving down the highway was, if I were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, that's really the only time I would consider menage a trois. And the van grew very quiet, which I took to mean that they were experiencing with great solemnity how vulnerable I was choosing to be. And I was kind of like patting myself on the back, Like my responsibility was to bring them on this team building retreat where we could come together and like really be honest with one another. And I was so proud of myself. Till I heard some whispering behind me, and I looked in the rearview mirror to see one freshman explaining to another freshman what a threesome was. And it rewound in my brain. I was like, oh, wait, no. It's surprisingly harder to explain in reverse what I explained to you all the right direction. Especially because there's a little bit of feasibility to it, right? If someone told you that the only time they would consider doing something scandalous is if they had been medically diagnosed as very forgetful, you would think they were just wanting plausible deniability, right? Did you have a threesome? Maybe, I don't know. And so that was the weekend that I learned that one of the best reasons for us to share our darkest fears with one another is that even with something as scary as Alzheimer's, you might find out that there could potentially be a silver lining. Thanks.